presentation. We're going to go ahead and get started in just a second. First, I'd like to say we're very excited to have Doug Henstridge with us as a presenter today. Doug has been at AssetWorks for over 11 years and is currently in the role of Senior Industry Consultant for Enterprise Asset Management. Before I pass things over to Doug, I just want to give everyone a quick heads up. The microphone has been muted, so if any of you have any questions at any time during the presentation, you can use the WebEx chat tool. You should all see the chat icon located on your screen, and this acts as an instant messaging tool. Please feel free to use the WebEx chat tool to answer questions asked by Doug during his presentation or enter any questions you may have throughout today's webinar. Make sure you send all the questions to the host, and I'll be happy to field and relay them to Doug at the conclusion of the presentation for a brief Q&A session. So with that said, I think we're ready to get started here. Doug, I can see your screen and you are good to start.
Great, thank you. So, let's see if I can get this to... I can't get there we go. I'm a little difficulty getting the slides to advance. So I guess good morning or afternoon to everyone. So we're going to go through some best practices. I would say this webinar is set to be a little more of an introduction to the topic. So we'll be looking at maybe narrowing down in future webinars to some of the items addressed here today, and also be looking for feedback from the group on what areas of interest might be there to kind of focus in on in the coming weeks and months. Today, we're going to look at kind of four main points. The first would be just generally look at the challenges with, and this goes to some of our customers' challenges they currently have in maintenance operations. These are things we've observed working with our customers or have gotten feedback from our customers when you know, with their use of the tool and running their maintenance operations. We'll talk some of the traps that come up in reactive maintenance, and then look at how you can focus on reliability and some of the tips for doing that with the tools available in terms of kind of starting to steer into a more reliable, reliability focused maintenance process. So, and as Grace alluded to, at the end of the session, we'll have some time for some Q&A. I plan to try and wrap up the presentation portion at about the 40-minute mark, so that should give us a little time at the end to answer any questions that come up as well. So, all right, so asset maintenance. So, you know, at a high level, this is a process which you keep assets working, right? That's the goal. That if you have, you know, in a facility management space, if you have heating and cooling equipment, you need them to be functional for the facility to be functional and for the folks working in the facility to be comfortable and able to do their jobs. And it could be anything from HVAC equipment to electrical components, backup generators, electrical panels, fuse boxes, overhead doors, elevators, any number of bits of equipment that all require some form of inspection, maintenance, lubrications, and just general cleaning or observation on some frequency, right? So some of the inspections we're talking about are as simple as monthly going through a facility and making sure, for example, AED devices and fire extinguishers are there and accessible, that emergency exit lighting is actually working, that emergency doors open and close cleanly. In other cases, you have more rigorous inspections, like, you know, eye wash stations. Is the water temperature correct? On some frequency, actually making sure valves work and water flows, etc. So these are all things that are very common in a maintenance operation. And, you know, and then thinking more broadly, you know, you have other areas where you may be in a public workspace, even going out and making sure that drains drain and that culverts aren't blocked, that bridges are safe, etc. So what we find is that each class of asset requires different routine maintenance, different schedule, different skill sets to actually conduct those inspections, So in a facilities maintenance organization specifically, we look at the frequency at which assets need to be inspected, that you need to lay eyes on them. In some cases, it is actual preventive maintenance where you may go in and change filters or adjust band tension or provide lubrication or verify fuel levels or things of that nature. These are generally based on calendar intervals. There are some less common scenarios where you might have hour meters, say if you're in like a treatment operation where you may have pumps and motors that are being inspected based on hours of operation or hours of use in a metered sense. Most of the time, though, we're looking at calendar-based intervals, monthly, quarterly, annual. Some of these will be embedded. Some of them will be standalone. It really just depends on the asset. The other thing we often see, and many of you may experience, is that, and I'm going to use HVAC assets as an example, that you may have a piece of HVAC equipment that in one environment gets one schedule, but in a different environment gets another schedule. For example, an air handling unit or a heating unit may get a monthly check, a quarterly filter change, an annual full inspection, or a seasonal full inspection. But in, say, a 24/7 operation like a 911 center, when those units are running 24/7, you may have to tighten that up, right? You may have to run it more quickly. You may have to, look at, instead of doing a quarterly filter change, you do a monthly filter change. And you need to kind of keep track of these things from a scheduling point of view. So that's kind of the high level, the kind of the overall target. What we've found with a lot of our customers is that they are in oftentimes a very reactive mode. There's a number of reasons for that. Sometimes it's insufficient staff, sometimes it's aging equipment that requires more attention. That means you're spending more time chasing down defects than you are actually routinely maintaining, or you get behind on your routine maintenance because you're busy working on other things. We have some customers that blend their, for example, maintenance staff and custodial staff. So you may have some of the same people that would normally be doing, say, inspection work, also dealing with what might be termed custodial work in a building, like dealing with leaky faucets and clogged toilets, which consumes time that may be required for doing, say, heating and cooling pump inspections or things of that nature. So we run into that a lot, and one of the things we also see is that, especially routine maintenance, is not always consistently or comprehensively planned. Meaning, we rely on a schedule triggering or a notification coming up to say, hey, it's time to do these PMs this week or this month. But now it's Monday, they're due this week, but do we have the bandwidth to do them? And I've actually seen customers that run into the situation where they have a monthly inspection required on an asset, but maybe they get to it 9 times a year, right? They either will let them slide a little bit. So it's like, well, I did it on the 1st of the month, but then I didn't get to it till the next month on the 10th, which means it's going to reschedule for the 10th next month. And then it slides. So you end up doing 9, or you end up skipping them, right? Because you simply didn't get to it. So these things happen, in that environment while you're chasing down all these little requests and defects and problem corrections, etc. So a quote I like to share, this is from William Deming. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with Deming. He was a kind of a pioneer in quality control. He was essentially sent to Japan after the Second World War and helped with reconstruction there in terms of training engineers and those that were going to rebuilding the industrial capability there in quality assurance methodologies, which led ultimately to the way a lot of the concept of some of the just-in-time work, some of the the responsibility and quality assurance through a manufacturing process. But his statement here is that the system you have in place is perfectly defined to give you the results you're getting. Meaning, if you're not planning work, if you're not scheduling time, if you're not looking at the procedures that are effective on a system base or an asset base, then having breakdowns, having those challenges, chasing maintenance is exactly the system you've got in place, and that's exactly what's happening. So what that often leads to is this environment of reactive maintenance, right? So you don't have work being effectively planned or scheduled. Some work may be planned, some work may be scheduled, but oftentimes it's more of you start the morning, you see what's on the agenda, you try and go get it done. It's more of like I said, it's more of a punch list of, hey, here's the stuff we're going to try and get done today, and then we'll see what we got going on tomorrow. This tends to lead to a wide variance in PM compliance. So you kind of see this little embedded report here, which is showing, a variance where, some things are coming due early, some are getting done late. As your preventive maintenance or your inspections are being done late, they're being shifted, they're being skipped, as I alluded to. You're not looking at things as frequently as they should be looking at, which will lead to the sort of dealing with breakdowns, right? So if you're not able to effectively inspect or correct or lubricate or identify potential failures early, that failure becomes a bigger problem later. The other piece are parts and materials, right? So if you're talking about parts and materials for say filter replacements or belt replacements on like large air handling equipment, for example, they may not be handy. So the idea is not, inventory is not kept, it's not kept efficiently. You're looking at ordering when PM schedules come up oftentimes. So if you wait until the PM is due to order materials, you may run into a back order issue. You may be delayed there. By the time the parts come in, you are now otherwise occupied. So it delays the maintenance even more. So there's a certain inefficiency in the process built in there when you're not effectively managing materials and inventory that would contribute to driving a preventive maintenance schedule. And the other part that I think is oftentimes the most frustrating, at least from my experience working with some of our customers and with agencies previously, is that everyone seems to be working very hard. Everyone has a full day. They are engaged in maintenance activities, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. But equipment continues to age, continues to break down. There isn't a sense of improvement, or you're still chasing the work in many respects. So this is, like I said, a challenge we see in a more reactive environment, or reactive centric environment, I should say. The other part of this is, which contributes to that some, is that PMs are maybe not adequately grouped for effective execution. So if you set up a PM schedule where you say need to do a monthly inspection of heating and cooling pumps, for example, in a building, how those are grouped, how that's done may drive the nature of whether or not you can get it done. Are you grouping them so in a large building that maybe has 20 stories, we're grouping them so that the PMs that are in a certain geography in the building, floors 1 through 4, let's say, trigger together so I can do them together? Or am I getting a random assortment throughout the building that, well, I've got 5 on the 2nd floor and 3 on the 12th floor and 4 on the 17th floor to do? That creates a lot of extra wasted time moving around, and it may not be the most effective way to execute the PMs. there are other options for grouping things as well. Like if I'm doing something as simple as a safety inspection that, are all of our emergency exits and emergency exit lighting compliant and functional? Do I have a plan, right? Do I have a plan in place to rotate through the building, or is it a little more hit and miss? The other thing is that sometimes similar assets don't have consistent schedules or checklists. And what I mean by that is different groups within the same organization may be maintaining or inspecting similar or same asset types, but they may have their own way of doing things. So one group at one site may inspect their boilers or their heating units using a checklist. Another one may have come up with a new checklist that doesn't jive, so you may not be checking the same things, right? There's a lack of standardization there, which makes training and cross-training and following procedures a little more difficult. Okay. The reasoning for checklists and checklist tasks may not be well documented or effectively understood or even current. It may be more of a case of, hey, this is the way we've always done it. This is the way it was conceived, 20 years ago, and we just keep using it that way, with a question of why, especially since you may have replaced some of that older equipment with newer equipment that may not need the same checks. So, and then sometimes we perform tasks even on equipment that probably should be retired or should be taken offline, sort of doing it that way. And if you have unnecessary or inadequate PMs, are often not removed. And so you end up with, and you can kind of see this example here, where you've got 136 items that are due for preventive maintenance, but are they really due, and in what order should I be doing these in, right? Because this is could be, there's different types of equipment, different PMs to be performed, but they're all kind of due at the same time. So how do I effectively organize that so I can get through it and I'm not jumping around wasting time? So one of the questions I'd like to ask at this point is, and you can put answers in chat, and I think Grace is going to monitor that, is, do you think your organization's more reactive or proactive at the moment? And if it's reactive, what's the biggest thing that you think you could work on to move to a more proactive approach? So what do you think is your biggest pain point that if you could solve it, it would help you to be a little more proactive? So I don't know, Grace, are we seeing any chat in on this?
I just saw one come in. I'm going to give it maybe a few more seconds so people can share their response. As a reminder, the chat tool should be right at the bottom right of your screen, so you can send them to host. Okay, so I'm seeing a few responses come in, and it looks like the overall response is reactive. And the reasoning behind it is they need better training. And it looks like another is, like you mentioned, Doug, of staff shortages.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And again, that's not uncommon or unexpected, right? A lot of the challenges I presented here are things that I experienced firsthand with some of the organizations I worked with over the past several years and decade, is exactly that: staffing, training, effective procedures, knowing the procedures, which circles back to the training piece. So yeah. Okay. So there we go. So let's shift to the reactive piece, talk about reliability. So one of the measures that there's a number of measures here that we kind of want to look at and this is obviously going to be a longer term thing, but when we look at more of a reactive focused versus what I'm going to call a reliability focused maintenance, or a proactive focused maintenance, we see things like the maintenance costs. So when we talk about percent of RAV, that's replacement asset value, and I'm going to talk about that here in a moment. But a lot of time in the reactive space, the percent is kind of high, and that's basically the cost of maintenance against what it would cost to replace the asset. In a perfect world, you'd want that to be less than 5, but closer to 2% of your maintenance cost. And that would mean that most of your maintenance costs were around inspection and routine or preventive maintenance. Reactive maintenance tends to be more expensive because you're fixing things, you're repairing things, you're replacing parts, etc. Plus, you have to factor in the cost of downtime when you have repairs. You have planners versus technicians. Oftentimes in the reactive space, you don't really have a planner, a work planner, a maintenance planner. And if you do, the proactive planning process is difficult, right? Because there's just a lot of work in the queue, and you're just trying to prioritize and get stuff done new each day. Whereas ideally, you'd want to have a planner for at minimum every 20 technicians, maintenance staff. So you have someone who's essentially monitoring a schedule and making sure there's a plan each week or each biweekly period for what needs to be done, and you're carving out time for getting your routine maintenance addressed as a priority. The backlog of work is oftentimes unknown in the reactive environment because it changes sometimes hourly. Whereas when you're thinking reliability, you have a good sense on the work you need to do over the next 2 to 4 weeks. How much of your work is planned? In a reactive space, it's probably less than 15%, could be even 0%. And it may be a little higher than 15%, but ideally you'd want it to be more than 80%, right? So that the bulk of your work is planned. PM compliance. And when I talk about PM compliance, that's PMs being completed plus or minus 3 days of their due date. It's often under 60%, maybe less than half. Whereas the goal should be to have that be 90%. Inventory accuracy. So on-hand inventory so that you can count on getting PMs done on time is often unknown. I've worked with agencies that simply don't track inventory. They just buy as they need. So they don't have it on hand. So they're always dependent on a supplier delivering something in order to complete a PM, which goes directly to compliance and directly to the ability to plan work if you don't have the materials you need. You'd want to have an effective inventory management, right? Maintenance training costs. So I think a couple folks talked about the fact that their staff needs training. Oftentimes there's no budget for it, so it's not getting done. Whereas you should have a training budget around 5% of your maintenance budget for your staff. So they're constantly being retrained or certified or just being brought up to speed on new equipment, new procedures, making sure folks know how to effectively work with or maintain their equipment. And then you have a high volume of maintenance rework, and you're going to have, you just don't have an accurate maintenance dashboard, right? So in a reactive space. So that's the problem. It's often it's almost you're a little blind to the future, and you're just chasing work essentially in that reactive space. So I mentioned the replacement asset value. So essentially what you look at here is you want that to be less than 5%, but like I said, closer to 2%. And what this tells us is the cost of when the cost of maintenance equals the cost of replacement effectively. So if I'm at, for example, you can see the little example here, if I'm at 2.5%, let's say, that means I'm spending about $1,200 a year maintaining an asset that would have a $50,000 replacement value, right? So that's probably going to drive to about a 20 to 25 year life cycle where I can effectively cover the cost of maintenance there. If I'm at an 8%, right, then I'm a much faster. I'm at 4,200. Now I'm looking at like 12 years. It's essentially less than half of that value. So what that means is at some point, if I maintain that 8% cost or 8% of RAV, I'm actually buying a new piece of equipment with the cost of maintaining the old one, right? And so that's kind of what we're looking at. And so that's why you want that to be low, because if your maintenance costs are low, that allows you to A, have higher, more reliable equipment, and B, you get a better calculation on when you need to replace a new one. And that goes to maintaining longer life cycles. So, and another couple, I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but I would say that one thing is that this isn't always going to be a fixed amount. There are some cases where it's a little higher, a little lower. That's why I kind of said between 2 and 5%, because sometimes that, 3-4% is just what it is. And that may evolve a little bit as that asset ages as well. So if something's brand new, should be very low. And something's about 10 years old, it's going to be a little higher, right? Because it's going to start seeing things going down. If you have a unit that works in a normal, in an office space that's got kind of a normal business hours, 5 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day of operation, it's going to have a different life cycle and a different maintenance cost versus a unit that's in a 24/7 operation where you're conducting routine maintenance more frequently. You may have issues that come up more frequently, and it will age faster. So those are all considerations that go into this. And of course, inflation plays a role here as well. So let's talk about some key areas of improvement to consider. One of the things would be to evaluate your current PM schedules and checklists and just make sure they're adequate, right? In some cases, you may find that less might be more, right? Do I really need to inspect something every month? Or do I need to have a case where as that unit ages, the inspection schedule changes, right? So I worked with an agency a few years back, and this was they ran a treatment plant, and as a specific asset in the plant or in the process aged and its condition deteriorated, it adjusted it. They adjusted the inspection schedule. So if something was brand new and was of a very high or excellent condition, the inspection schedule on it was a little more spread out, right? And then as it aged and as they started noticing its condition deteriorating over time, they would shorten it up. So it would go from 6 months to quarterly to monthly as it aged until they replaced it. And so those are some things to consider as well, that brand new equipment may not necessarily require the same level of attention as middle-aged assets, for example. The other thing is to make sure your checklists are appropriate for the class of asset, right? So you want to make sure that you're revisiting your inspection checklists as you bring in new pieces of equipment, new assets, because things change. The way units are constructed changes, and you often can use the OEM recommendations as a good guide that you may have to diversify the schedule and the checklist process a little bit as you go. The other part of that goes back to the training. If you have a training budget, you also then need to make sure that your staff is trained to handle those changes as they're occurring over time. And then you want to make sure you're monitoring compliance and kind of putting a level of accountability on compliance. As I said, generally plus or minus 3 days of scheduled date at more than 90% would be kind of a gold star in terms of compliance. But obviously you can look at a path to get there, right? Maybe the first step is say, we don't know what our compliance is now. Let's see if we can get to 70% plus or minus 5 days. And once you accomplish that, then you look at, all right, now we want 90% plus or minus 5 days. And then you start working your way to it. It's like anything else. It won't happen overnight. But if you set goals and targets along the way, you can kind of grow into a more compliant environment. Right. The other thing is to monitor faults in equipment. right? So a lot of organizations have these daily log sheets. I've seen this. I've seen this with, with boilers. I've seen it with uh, organizations that run, say, ice arenas with the ice making equipment, where they have a paper form. It could be like a printed out spreadsheet or some other type of form attached to a clipboard at the piece of equipment where they go in and they take readings and put down results and make note of things. And then, after, I don't know, 20 times that sheet is full, they take it off, put a new one on, and they put it in a filing cabinet and they store it away. But the data is not as useful. Yeah, you may find something that's automatic. Just from experience, say, well, this is off, but you may not. I was talking to one of our customers. They pointed out that even experienced technicians, when they do their boiler logs every day, will write numbers down, and without even thinking about it, they just fill the log sheet in, leave the clipboard, and walk off without realizing that the boiler temp was either too high or too low, because they got into a mode of, I just need to record this information and move on, right? And it's not that they're doing a bad job. It's just they're so overworked elsewhere. They're just noting the values and not realizing that may be an indication of a bigger problem. So one of the things to do with automating this, where you're basically doing an electronic log that now becomes reportable, and that can even have notifications when it drops above or below certain values, assists in kind of early warning on things that could be an indication of a pending failure, so that you're not going to repair a failure, but you're getting out in front of something that may be a problem. Okay, so as we go through, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the tools that we have that might help with some of these things. Obviously, for those of you on the call that are our current users, you have your basic work order structure that allows you to capture costs, right? Labor, parts, vendor costs, if you have vendors come in to do some of your inspections, etc. Right? You can effectively managing labor costs. More important, labor hours is important. One, in that it helps you determine how much it actually costs to maintain the asset. You can also understand utilization of staff. So if you're falling short on getting PMs completed, you can look and see, well, everybody's working and posting time and tracking time, full 100% of their time on maintenance, and yet we're still not getting to these PMs. Why is that, right? And the other thing this gives you is data to create job estimates, so that you can predefine from a planning point of view that if we're going to do this quarterly inspection, that's going to take us an hour, and we have to plan, and we have 20 of these pieces of equipment. So every quarter we have to plan for 20 hours to do this inspection. And when you set your schedule to come up as on an incremental basis, so you can spread those 20 hours out, you can now plan that and maybe say that, hey, every other Monday we're going to do X number of these throughout the quarter, and put them on a schedule that way. And you can predefine the time frame on a calendar to know that that's what certain staff should be doing at that time of day, right? So gathering that data and getting effective information on what it really takes is important. A lot of it requires capturing the actual data and calculating estimated times to complete based on actual experience. The other piece of that is managing materials, right? So if you know the materials you need, the grade and type of lubricant, the size of a filter, the size of a belt, or any other things that would be potentially replaced during preventive maintenance, building or tracking inventory, or identifying a way of managing, having at least the next set on hand, gives you more flexibility in scheduling the work. And by doing that, you can also build a standard parts list for the PM schedule, so that when you generate that, it'll actually bring up the exact things you need, and they should be ready. So again, an example from a customer I've worked with, they maintain in each of their mechanical rooms the next set of filters and a spare belt for like their air handling equipment in the box in the room. So when they schedule their PM for that, they know they have the materials on hand. They can go and they can schedule it. They can go and do it. And when they do it, that's a trigger to reorder the next set that they store in the room, so they're ready to go for the next time. That allows them, though, to maintain a level of compliance with the timeline, to not have to worry about whether or not they'll be able to have a part delivered in time because they have it available already. Those are simple things to do, and it don't require a large inventory operation. Just simply having that next set available can be very helpful. Right. And there's also some opportunities for cost savings when you do advanced ordering, bulk purchasing, or things of that nature as well. So the other thing is to look at planning work, right? So I kind of talked about a couple of things to help plan work, that if you kind of know what it should take to complete a routine maintenance action or proactive maintenance action, you can set up that standard estimate. If you know what materials you need for different activities, you can set up those standard parts, have them available on hand, and then you can look at the scope of your activity to know how much time will I need to spend every quarter, every 6 months, every year conducting routine maintenance. Look at staff and then lay out a schedule that allows you to block time to facilitate compliance. And then you can plan that workout, right? To dedicate certain days of the week or maybe certain half days of the week to do this work for different staff. And then the other thing is making sure your staff is adequately trained and skilled in order to do the work. One of the tools I mentioned here is a RACI, a chart. A RACI chart is responsibility and a responsibility matrix. You know, who's responsible for something, who is going to have authority to plan it, who's going to have input, etc. But getting that matrix to know that, you know, these are the folks that are going to be doing routine maintenance. These are the folks we're going to rely on for this type of reactive maintenance. These are the folks that are going to be doing this type of reactive maintenance. And then also looking at training programs and plans to be able to be prepared to backfill people as they may move on or retire or want to do something different, right? To provide growth opportunity and to be prepared, and simply to be prepared to backfill someone who goes on vacation for 2 weeks, to know that, oh, this person is that person's backup, right? To always have that. Another key element here will be looking at making sure you have effective procedures in place. And procedures should be reviewed frequently, right? Is our schedule right? Is our timing right? Are the checklists appropriate? Are we finding faults during PMs that can be corrected, or are we being surprised by equipment breaking down, right? So this would, these things would include what does the manufacturer recommend, right? For maintaining this piece of equipment, for inspecting this piece of equipment. We should have written guidance especially on routine maintenance, right? So if I have a checklist, each checklist item should have some written guidance as to how that actually should be performed, right? Are we effectively training staff to execute correctly, right? Do we have safety procedures in place? Do they need to make sure they have gloves? Do they have safety glasses? Are they wearing a hard hat, etc.? And in fact, the most experienced maintenance folks you have should be included in this discussion, in crafting these procedures, even potentially external. So when you're buying a piece of equipment, you may want to have the OEM, the manufacturer, help you review maintenance procedures or understand how effectively to maintain them. And then we talk about this, and effectively, this gets back to like the concept of SMART goals, but the idea is you want to make sure that your procedures are as oriented as possible to best practices. That makes them repeatable and easy and more easily learned. They should be consistent, so you should try and maintain a level of consistency around certain things, especially as it relates to safety and handling, but as well as the way procedures are crafted and the way people are trained. Obviously, you want to execute. You want to make sure you're driving training and certification, and the big thing is they should facilitate quality. And the other thing to keep in mind is that there are AI tools available that will allow you to help do some of this. It is a pretty even a tool like a ChatGPT, where you simply go in and say, hey, what is the appropriate checklist for a certain type of air handling unit? They'll give you a list of things to do. Now, whether that applies to your situation directly is something to be reviewed, but it's definitely a great starting point. It'll give you a generic checklist that you can start reviewing and looking at, getting together with the subject matter experts or people that are very familiar with that equipment, and crafting a procedure around that. But there is definitely tools available that help you kind of jumpstart some of this, if you're struggling with this now. Right. The other thing is as I mentioned, to proactively look for finding faults. Your PM and your routine maintenance should be looking for faults, and you should be looking at automating this data, right? That's a key thing, because when you automate it, you can report on it, you can find trends, and now you're starting to look more predictive, right? If I see maybe a certain value on a screen or on a temperature reading or something that is gradually getting higher, gradually getting lower, that may be an indication of a fault or a failure coming down the road, and allows me to get out in front of it to potentially either A, repair something, or B, replace a component piece before it creates a bigger problem. So that's where I think that getting away from the paper and into a digital format it can be very effective. And I know I'm running a bit long, so I'll try and get to the Q&A process here as quickly as I can. The other piece is defect correction. How are you going to handle defect correction when you're doing your preventive maintenance? Are you accounting for that? Are you recording that happened? So if you're applying additional lubrication, are you adjusting belt tension? Are you marking off a checklist where you said, yes, it passed, but we had to do this corrective action? Because that again should be an indication that something may be starting to go wrong that you want to take a look at. So again, those are items that you want to make sure you build into the procedural process and gather as much data as you can. I talked about automating procedures, again, being able to capture data, report on data, use parameters of pass fail, or a range of values to trigger maintenance operations is often another way to go. So you can start also using the automated process of building deferred maintenance, essentially, to say that, hey, if this failed or if this value fell outside the range, we can trigger an action that then would require immediate attention, or may just require monitoring until the next time to see if it persists or if it gets worse, or was it just an anomaly? Or maybe you want to go back more quickly and do a recheck, schedule a recheck more frequently. The other thing I would point out when we talk about fault identification, sorry about that. Where's that close? Pop up. When we talk about fault identification, is having a procedure in place for how you deal with that, right? So if it's clear it passed, you mark it as passed. If it's a minor issue that you can correct immediately, like something is dirty, needs to be cleaned, maybe some grease or some dirt has built up and a simple cleaning solves the problem, then those should be noted again, right? Mark as passed with notes or mark as passed corrected. So it's reportable. If it fails, what's the procedure for a failing? Do you want to do a fix immediately to avoid downtime? Do you go about scheduling a repair later? Is it something that requires more expertise than the person doing the inspection has? That means, do they need to mark it off as failed, take it offline, create a repair order or corrective maintenance action and come back and fix it? Do you need to bring a vendor in to do that work? It's important to have this procedure in place and have clear instruction and guidance on when to do certain things and how to document them, right? And I think the last thing I want to talk about here is the idea of automating a daily log. So I alluded to that earlier, where you can kind of go through and say, gee, I need to go and I need to measure the water temp and the PSI on the boiler every morning, to go in and track that, mark it, and then look for trends, right? Look for a trend that says, hey, temperature's up, it's down. Does that correlate with something else? Was the ambient temperature higher or lower? Is that trend, is it an anomaly like this little graph shows, or is it a trend going one direction or the other? These are things that can help, again, your maintenance planners or your maintenance supervisors, or even your asset managers, to look at things and say, this may be a bigger problem. This may be something we need to look at. And now you're starting to look at predictive maintenance, which feeds the concept of reliability here. So this last piece just talks about, how you can do that in the field by collecting it in an automated fashion, where you can simply build a checklist, capture data, you can capture real values, you can mark something's pass fail. Once you capture it in a database and in a system, it can actually be reported on. You can actually look for trends, you can look for anomalies. And so that's kind of the idea here is, kind of to sum up really, is focus on procedures, on planning work, preparing staff to execute best practices, and gathering as much data as you can to make informed decisions in order to drive scheduling and the overall asset management maintenance process. So with that, I am a few minutes over my target, but we are into the Q&A. So I guess, Grace, I'll ask you if we have any questions that have come in.
Yes. So we are now going to open up the floor for questions. Just one final reminder that you can ask them, chatting them into me using the WebEx chat tool on your screen. They'll be sending it to host. Provided that we have enough time, I'll pass your question to Doug and he'll be happy to give you an answer. It looks like we have a couple questions coming in. So the first one, Doug, how can I plan work when staffing may be short? And are there strategies to employ to shift to a more planned maintenance approach?
Sure. So when you have short staffing, obviously it's difficult, right? Because they already are fully engaged. They're already fully busy. So how do you effectively do that? And sometimes it just means trying to balance and carving out time to start. You just have to start somewhere. I don't know how else to put it. You just have to start somewhere. It's like anything else, right? You have to start. And maybe the first thing is to say that, let me prioritize certain assets and certain aspects of my preventive maintenance program and say, these are our most critical assets. These are the things we actually have to do, and we have to do them as close to on time as possible. And then look at a calendar, whether you're in the AssetWorks software or you're just using Outlook. Look at a calendar and say, okay, I am going to take this one experienced person who generally does these, and I'm going to block them off for X number of hours every week to focus on that. That's the starting point. And that does mean that maybe some of your reactive maintenance is going to be a little bit deprioritized or may go into a deferred maintenance pool a little bit. But one way to handle that is to say, well, if it's commonality of of basically corrective maintenance, maybe I bundle that and try and address more of it together. So the example is one customer I've worked with where they have a process where folks can put requests into their facility maintenance operation to, for various things. There's some of it are custodial, so that's a different group that gets requested, but some of it are simple, like, well, the door hinge is squeaky, or the door doesn't close right, or the lock is sticky. So those are things that are, maybe if it's an exterior door, it's a higher priority than if it's a conference room door. And maybe it's that I can defer a little bit, I can deprioritize. And as I accumulate enough of these in that area, I can create one work action, send someone out to do all of those things rather than, jumping back and forth, right? So look at first trying to group things by location in a facility, and then prioritize what can wait a few days versus what I have to do now versus what I have to do to ensure the longer term life cycle of critical assets, and start small, right? It's like I said, choose your most critical asset, your most the person who's got the most skill in doing it, and identify the PM schedule and say, let's start that every Tuesday morning, Joe is going to be doing these PMs on these assets, and I'm going to block him out. And then once you get that in place, then look for the next most critical asset and the next most important PM that goes along with it, and do that as well. And it's just gradually get into it, right? Because I know, especially in the public sector, hiring more people can be a challenge. Staffing up can be a challenge. So you often have to work with the human resources you have. But I think, that's essentially the way I would recommend. Start small and grow from there.
Great. And another question, Doug. If you're familiar with it, the program looks like someone currently has IBM Tririga.
Tririga.
Tririga. And how is our program different from theirs?
Most facility maintenance programs do a lot of the same things, right? You can set up PM schedules, you can set up work orders, you can reactive maintenance, you can have your occupants, your customers make requests for maintenance. I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with Tririga recently to tell you that we're better or different. I think they're, if you're already a fleet customer, for example, there's some advantage to bundling the software, in the product in from a support function, from a system administrative function. There's some value there. But God, ultimately, I guess I can put my AssetWorks hat firmly on my head and say we're just better. But I don't know if that is fair, because I'm biased in that respect. But I would say that everything that Tririga does for you now, we could effectively do. But yeah, I'm not as familiar with some of their other tools, like their mobile options, etc. That I could effectively steer you to say that this is better or that's better. Knowing that it's IBM, we're probably less money, but other than that.
And if they're interested in seeing maybe our software in a demo, we are able to provide that to them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We can certainly do that. And I know, Grace, you and Bradley can work with the account management team to facilitate that for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and it looks like we have another question. Should preventive/routine maintenance be defined by location or site, and type of asset, or would a better approach be based on how common assets might be used differently?
Um, I would say it really should be more standardized to saying common assets. So in other words, if we're talking about and I kind of alluded to this in the presentation, right? That if you've got the same type of unit in, let's say, 6 different facilities across your organization or across your area of responsibility, then it should realistically have the same preventive maintenance procedures, a same preventive maintenance checklist. You should be treating it the same way, and the procedures and the processes for taking care of it should be the same. Where it will differentiate is kind of what I pointed to earlier, is that if that unit, let's say it's an air handling unit, for example, is in a main admin building that is only open Monday through Friday from 7 to 6, and then goes offline on the weekends and goes offline overnight, then it's probably going to get a different PM schedule than, say, that same unit that might be in your 911 center that has to run 24/7. It's simply being used 2.5 times is often. It's running 2.5 times more than the more standard use. So you would definitely have a more compressed PM schedule, and you might need to actually build in at some point in its life cycle, like an overhaul or a little bit of a rebuild or something of that nature. And that's where working with your equipment manufacturer can help, right? Because obviously, if it's a piece of equipment that's got a 25-year lifespan, the 25-year lifespan is based on a certain normal usage parameter. And if you're using it twice what that normal is, then that you're either going to shorten that lifespan, or at some point in that, you're going to have to plan in a large preventive maintenance that's more of an overhaul type maintenance or a rehabilitation type maintenance that should be planned for. But you wouldn't do that for every one of the units. You'd only do it for the one that's in that operation. So I'd say you want to look at really how it's used first, and then potentially where it's installed, because where it's installed could bring in some environmental factors that might contribute to accelerated aging or things of that nature, because all of those come into play for sure. I think another question popped up there.
No, that's actually it.
Oh, okay. I got a little pop up on my screen. I didn't know if that was
Yeah.
one that came in.
Yes, individual have more questions unique to their organization, so we'll get those answered.
Okay.
But for all general questions, that's all we have. So I would like to thank everyone again for attending today's presentation. Before we wrap things up, feel free to chat me any topics from this webinar you would be interested in diving into further in a future webinar. That all said, I hope you've all secured some valuable takeaways to keep in mind moving forward. Doug, I'd also like to thank you on behalf of ASSETWORKS once again for sharing your expertise with everyone today. As you see, Doug's contact information is available here should any of you have any follow-up questions. I hope you all have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you with us next time.
Great. Thank you, Grace.